The battle for rule of law and the fight for democracy has never been more important. Democracy Forward's president and CEO, Skye Perryman, is here to discuss. Welcome back to Defending Democracy. I'm Marc Elias. Let's get started. Welcome back to Defending Democracy, Skye Perryman.
Thanks for having me, Marc.
All right. Well, lots been going on in the pro-democracy space, and you and your organization, Democracy Forward, has been literally in the thick of almost every big fight and all the big victories. So there are some particular cases I want to talk about and particular themes I want to talk about, but maybe you could start by just giving everyone an overview of how they should think about the fights for democracy in court. Are we winning? Are we losing? Is it making a difference? Is Donald Trump on his heels? Is he ignoring them? How do you describe what is going on?
Well, I think that we know that people are going to get us through where we are. It's not going to be the courts. It's not going to be institutions. You say this all the time. It is going to be people. But one of the best tools that people have is to initiate litigation against their government, to file cases against their government when their government violates the law, violates their rights, and harms them. And so how I think it's going is rather well if you look at it that way, because people and communities in this country in the last 200 days, and I think today, Marc, we're at 200 days, or just a little over 200 days, there have been more than 400 lawsuits filed by people and communities across this country. We have filed a lot of them. And judges of all ideologies, whether they were appointed by Democrats, Republicans, some of them even appointed by Trump themselves, are ruling against the administration. There are setbacks because the administration doesn't want to follow court orders. The Supreme Court will talk about that and delve into that. But the main takeaway is the courts are an important power for people. People are using the courts, and we are seeing it stop and slow what this administration is doing. We are now seeing this administration walk away from fights in the courts, completely abandon their position, and pull back the harmful things that they were doing to people. I wish they would do that a lot more, and I know you wish they would do that a lot more, but we're starting to see that. So I think that that's kind of where we sit. It's not all rose-colored glasses, but this is a very powerful tool for people, and we're seeing that it's winning.
Okay, so maybe you could just pick one or two cases as just like an example of how your litigation, how your team's efforts, and the courts are making a practical difference for people.
Sure. Let's start with education since school's going to start up. It seems like summer, it was just here and is now about to be gone, but since school's about to start up. So we've all seen in Project 2025, Trump said he was going to come in and delete or dismantle the Department of Education. People thought that was hyperbole. It wasn't. They're trying to do it. Democracy Forward got into court and secured a nationwide order that blocked the president's ability to dismantle the Department of Education. That meant that employees at the Department of Education were able to do their jobs for longer. They were able to put things in place that help people. The Supreme Court, on its shadow docket, has stayed our order. So now some of these terminations are happening at the Department of Education. But what's happened is that gave people a moment to take a breath and see what was happening. So all of a sudden, you now have people in red communities and blue communities and members of Congress on both sides of the aisles at time feeling a bit uncomfortable about what this president is doing to education because of the power of the court. And we're going to continue to vigorously litigate that case. But that's not the only case on education. The president also thought right after the Supreme Court stayed his order on the Department of our order on the Department of Education, the president also thought that he was going to withhold about $7 billion from schools that are starting back up now. So these are public schools across the country that are not going to get their funds. Teachers were really concerned. Parents were concerned. Members of Congress were concerned. We sued. And as a result of that suit, the administration and the public pressure, the administration has already released all the funds. And now schools will be able to start in the fall with billions of dollars with the money that they needed to operate their school. So that's an example of how a case is in this portfolio. We've had some setbacks. The Supreme Court stopped one of our court orders, but we've continued to see that power of litigation is going to enable students to go to school this fall and to be able to get the education and the programs that they need, including in rural areas where they really rely on federal funding because of our litigation. Another
Yeah.
practical, yeah, so like the other example, I mean, we do, a lot of examples, but and on the immigration context, we have blocked a policy that prevents, or a policy that was going to keep unaccompanied minors away from their family members or
Hmm.
loved ones. And we've been able to block that. It hasn't gotten as much of the headlines as some of our other
No, it
uh,
hasn't. That's really great.
in immigration work, but we, for what we know, they're reasonably complying. There's a bunch of problems with ICE, and we're going to be in court a lot on ICE in the coming days and weeks. But these are things that are tangibly helping the lives of people. Sometimes they don't capture the headlines, but they're really helping people, and it's because people are going to court.
Yeah, and one of the things that you and I agree with, and for so everyone knows, I helped create Democracy Forward back in the beginning when you were not running the organization. You were a great courtroom litigator. You still are, and I continue to be the chair of its board. But one of the things that I really cherish about your leadership and the work you've done since Donald Trump's taken office is you've really sort of understood at a core level, like an instinctual level, that when lawyers say that they'll let their briefs do the talking, they're actually making a huge mistake. Like you all completely changed the narrative, completely changed the politics around the grabbing and the sending migrants to foreign gulags with the case you and the ACLU brought involving the Venezuelans who were sent to El Salvador to that infamous prison. And it was against the backdrop, and you and I talked about it at the time, it was against the
Yeah.
backdrop of a lot of other so called pro democracy groups saying, don't pick this fight. You're going to walk into Donald Trump's trap if you pick this fight. If you bring this case, why are you're going to bring a case? It's immigration. It involves, Venezuelans who are accused of being gang members. Don't pick this fight. Even if you win, you'll create backlash and terrible politics. And by the way, these people are never coming back. Well, guess what? Guess what? You won the case. Those folks have been released. But as importantly, you completely changed the way in which the public now thinks about that effort. So, talk a little bit about the way you think about the interplay between the public's consciousness of an issue, the litigation strategy for it, and frankly, how you withstand the pressure of people telling you, please don't do this, please don't do this.
I have good friends like you that say, go for it. No, so, one thing we know, and I think it's so important in this time when people are really having to take a step back and reflect on where we are. It's a very scary time for so many people, for all of us. There's a common humanity, and litigation is about people because every client we represent has a problem that we are going to court to solve. And so if we listen to our clients, and we are just in the business of solving problems. What we know is that, like, if Mr. Garcia doesn't want to be taken in the middle of the night without anyone ever talking to him about whether he was in a gang or what kind of tattoo he may or may not have, you probably don't want to either, right? And people understand that. Like, no one wants the government snatching them up and removing them from the country without process. Most people don't want ICE in their churches, and we're litigating those cases right now, and in their houses of worship. And so we listen to people and we bring cases based on that. And then with the bet that if the American people can see what's happening and can feel and see the humanity in these cases, we really do believe in people. We're a democracy. We do believe in people. And so we really put the people over the politics. Another example, the last time I got to join you on this show, we were talking, I think it was on Inauguration Day or right after Inauguration Day. We were one of the first organizations to sue Doge. And a lot of our
Mm-hmm.
friends and pro democracy groups, they thought Doge was going to be popular because people, the
That's
government's
right.
not real.
That's actually that's you know what, I forgot about that. Everyone thought Doge was going to be like. Remember, you had Democrats being like, "I want to join Doge, the
Oh, I
Doge
had to
caucus."
go
Like,
talk to some of them and like say, please don't get mad at me. I am actually filing this lawsuit, right? And the litigation told the stories. And then, of course, the Trump administration doesn't want to be transparent about anything. So unless you get into court and have a judge asking them questions, you're not going to find out anything. And so we were able to expose Doge for what it was relatively quickly, making it a political liability in the same way we've done in the JGG case with the ACLU. And so that's kind of how we see it. And what we've seen is that people want to know that there are folks standing up and fighting in this moment. So actually, once you file the case and get it moving and the stories are out there, it's not as hard as it might seem, because there's a lot of support and momentum and energy for this once you step out there, right? And there's a lot of scared people before you take that first step.
So one of the things that I have an advantage in the litigation I do is that I actually don't need to know that much law. Like if I know a few, I know the Constitution about voting, and I know some voting laws, I'm kind of
Your
ready to
laws
go.
might go away, right? Like what's going to
Right,
happen if
right.
right?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a minute. But one of the things I admire so much about you is, and it really sort of first came on my radar screen after the terrible Dobbs decision, when again there were just a lot of groups that were like, well, Roe v. Wade just got overturned, so I guess like we're done. Like, and by the way, like you know, I read Roe versus Wade, read Casey, the Casey Day opinion back in the day, read Dobbs. I was like, that seems terrible. I mean, it's like a horrific outcome for women, and it just seems like terrible constitutional law. But you actually were like, wait, hold on, everyone. We have these other sort of statutory arguments and regulatory arguments, and like a lot of the work that Democracy Forward does seem to require a very broad understanding of a lot of intricacies of how you can use these sort of side avenues to get at what are usually thought of as just straightforward either constitutional issues or sort of big statutes. So describe a little bit about how you do that mechanically. The lawyers watching this will be interested, but also like why that is such an important way of attacking problems like states restricting reproductive rights, or an agency being abolished, or rights of people to not be separated from their children in immigration custody. Like, talk a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, we have an exceptional team and people come with different professional backgrounds, and that is very helpful, right? We have, lawyers that have litigated all different types of things. But I think our key to it, and Marc, you helped set this up at Democracy Forward when we first started. The key to it is not being siloed within issues. Democracy Forward understands the through line. We understand that if you're attacking the right for someone to access abortion care, you might as well be attacking it on contraception care, and maybe it becomes vaccines. And by the way, the same playbook they used on abortion, they're now using on books in libraries. They're
Hmm.
doing a bunch of censorship work, right? The same, it's not a ban, it's a restriction. Okay, now it's a ban. This is the same playbook that we saw play out. And because the right, of course, is organized, the far right is organized by this constellation of highly organized, well funded groups that don't always pick one issue. They see across issues. MAGA sees across issues. So, one of the keys to our success, I think, has been we don't silo our issues. If you are a lawyer and you know how to litigate a reproductive rights case, we're going to ask you to help out your colleague that knows how to litigate an environmental case, and maybe you're going to learn something about how you litigate an environmental case that you can apply to other things. And so we're constantly using new tools, learning new laws, looking to apply laws that apply overall, but like sort of looking to apply them in different ways. And what's been quite amazing about this moment is that we've actually been able, I think, to start bringing some other groups along with us. The pro democracy ecosystem has been very siloed, and Democracy Forward was sort of an answer to that siloing. We see the through line, but we're now working with so many groups that they're still focused on their issues, but we can bring forward and say, look, we tried this over here in a reproductive rights case, and we think there's no reason it wouldn't be useful in another case. And so that's how mechanically we do that. We're constantly looking. We also start from the premise that if something is harmful And if something deprives people of their ability to thrive, their ability to live the life that this country and our democracy promises, never delivered on it fully, but promises, that there must be something unlawful about it. That might be a more, that might be a more optimistic view of the law, but we start from that premise. And you have to prove to us that if something is so terrible that there's not some way that the law and our courts can help us get in and figure out how to solve people's problems. So that's kind of a lot of the work we do, and we push people. And we also have a lot of lawyers at the beginning of their career, and I really like working with lawyers at the beginning of their career because they're not as jaded, and they sort of sometimes bring up some of the best ideas because they've read something in law school and maybe think they're present for a conversation. So it's really fun.
I'll be right back with more of my conversation with Skye Perryman in a moment. But I founded Democracy Docket in 2020 to shine a spotlight on the attacks on voting rights and free and fair elections and democracy. And boy, now 5 years later, that spotlight needs to shine brighter than ever before. And that's why the team at Democracy Docket needs your support. By becoming a premium member now, you'll help them focus on the anti-democratic groups that are undermining free and fair elections, the Republican voter suppression tactics, and everything that Donald Trump and his allies are trying to do to undermine the democracy. So please become a premium member now by clicking on the link above or in the description below. I want to get into some of the more nitty-gritty details, and I want to start with, I think, one of your great democracy successes, which is not really a particular case or particular litigation, but you guys tackled Project 2025 really early. Like you guys created what is now the working group, like the unified working group on the left and in the pro democracy space, the framework that is how this is being taken on. And we talked the last time about how much foresight that took and all the credit you deserve there. But for people who are now very much aware that Project 2025 is being implemented, where do you see us in that? Like, have we gotten through the worst of Project 2025? Is there still, are they, is the Trump administration still like picking new battles there? I hear, some people think, well, Doge must be over because Elon Musk is gone. Other people say, no, 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 actually, Doge is now like actually more active and dangerous than ever. Like, where do you think we are in terms of the other side's playbook?
I think we're right in the messy middle of it. And I think it's getting harder for us. We're prepared, so we'll get to that. But it's getting harder for us to really be able to detect everything. And that's what we're spending a lot of resources at Democracy for, doubling down on our resources to make sure that's historically been one of our strong suits is detecting under the radar things.
Yeah.
People don't know what's going on. So it is easier. Yeah, all we had to do, people give us a lot of credit. You've been very kind. All we had to do was read the thing and believe what we know about these people and say, well, like, of course, if they get power, they're going to do this. They tried to overturn an election. Like, of course, they're going to do it. So it's easier, hard to go into court on it, but easier to know, like, here are these big ticket things, and Trump's going to go tweet about something and sit in the Oval Office and do something, and everyone's going to be outraged. And that's kind of, you knew that for days 1 through 100. We're at 200 days kind of for that time. Now, what's happening is that Trump's associates, including, by the ways, the authors of Project 2025, are embedded in these federal agencies. And they're starting to do some of the more harmful things that may not get the headline of, dismantling the entire Department of Education. But they're going to require, certifications for every single time you take a federal dollar. You have to sign a certification that is autocratic, saying you're not going to do anything that rhymes with the word equity. And if they catch you doing it, you're going to probably go to jail because you're going to have a False Claims Act violation, right? Those are the kinds of things we're challenging now. We're winning against a lot of those, but those are harder to detect than a big signing ceremony where Trump says he's going to rewrite the Constitution and take birthright citizenship out of it. So those are the kinds of things. So I think we're right in the messy middle. I think we need everybody on the field that we can get to do this work, whether you're a lawyer or not. We need everybody doing what they can, and then of course Trump has done so much that wasn't in Project 2025 that we know and can predict because we know how autocratic regimes operate. And we're just starting to get to that. And I know you've been writing a lot about that and the retribution agenda and the intimidation agenda. I think we're only starting to see the beginning of that.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you about democracy forward and fears of retribution. But you mentioned the birthright citizenship, and there was a lot of well-founded concern and anxiety by the Supreme Court's decision to essentially limit how broad injunctions can be uh, when you have a violation of statute or a violation of constitutional rights. I'm going to leave the doctrinal issues behind, but essentially the ability to go before a judge and say this is a unconstitutional law and it's blocked, and then it's blocked universally nationwide, got restricted by the Supreme Court in what I think was a wrongly decided case. Also, by the way, an oddly conveniently timed case. I never remember this being a concern when there were judges in Texas issuing nationwide injunctions. But set that aside. There was at the time though a suggestion that okay, this is bad. This is like not. This is no sugarcoating. It's bad, but that there were going to be ways around this. And I know you guys have been exploring those and having some early successes there. So talk about what obstacles that puts in place for your clients and for Democracy Forward itself, and what you see as the path forward in still being able to protect people's rights.
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, and you've said this too, it's a disappointing decision in this moment to have the court essentially write out things that have been well within its equitable power for some time, is really concerning. And it's one of the reasons why the American public has a lot of concern about the Supreme Court, because they're not operating as the check that they need to operate in a consistent manner. I mean, this is why we have courts, is to stop this stuff. But um, we have secured, I think, more nationwide or kind of broad relief orders than any group, because we just are able to work across so many issues and have a great team. And none of our injunctions yet have been disturbed. I'm not saying that they won't be, but we have carefully litigated our cases for some time. This obsession, and you know this from your work, with nationwide injunctions whenever the Trump starts losing has not. This is not a new thing, although they got it up to the Supreme Court quickly. And so many of our cases, of course, are filed under a law called the Administrative Procedure Act. For those that are tuning in, you all know what it is. But after the New Deal, when people had a lot of concerns about this bigger federal government, Congress passes a law, and it protects the American people from arbitrary and capricious government, and from government that's operating not in accordance with the law. So there's a lot of that going on. Most of our cases, our big funding cases where we're keeping federal funds for communities turned on, these are cases that have been brought under the Administrative Procedure Act. And the majority actually acknowledged in a footnote that it was not sort of opining on that. Congress in the Administrative Procedure Act requires that the court in some instances vacate or set aside these policies. So Donald Trump, one of his biggest tools is the federal government and these federal agencies and regulations. We're going to keep bringing those cases. I'm sure they'll have a scheme to try to get rid of the Administrative Procedure Act at some point, but right now they don't. And we're going to keep bringing these cases and keep winning these orders. Class actions, of course, have been, and I know you brought some, I mean, class actions have been a traditional tool. This is not new. I'm really glad people are paying attention. This is like the stuff we like to pay attention to the birthright class actions. But the JGG case, which was filed before the CASA decision came out, that was a class action. We have a number of class actions, so we'll continue to litigate those. And then, of course, we represent a lot of plaintiffs who have members all over the country. And really, in order to be able to secure relief for all the people that we're representing, sometimes it's just like too hard to do that without granting more nationwide relief. So we're going to continue to make those decisions in cases to do the best we can. But it is, and Justice Jackson called it, this catch me if you can justice. That's what she said in the oral argument. And I think that is it's really concerning when you look at what the court did there, and you look at what they did in other cases like Medina, that's our Planned Parenthood case around private rights of action. There does seem to be a real attempt by some on the far right to eliminate the ability of people to get into court. And that should concern every single American. And we're not going to let it stop us. We're going to keep getting into court, but it is a concerning trend.
Yeah, I alluded to this, but I don't ever remember a particular judge in a particular courthouse in Texas worrying much about issuing nationwide injunctions. Is this right wing concern? Is this new? Because I don't ever remember the right wing being concerned about
Yeah,
that.
the only time they were concerned was in 1.0 when he was losing a lot. And I just also want to say, because some of us were talking about in Texas, and this is the mifepristone
That's what
case,
I'm alluding to. Yeah,
people that are following this, and it's really important. So, like in Texas, what that was a sort of, I mean, 9 justices of the Supreme Court said like these guys don't even belong in the courts because it was a manufactured case, with someone that didn't have any harm. And there was this notion in a single judge district, like nobody's filing in single judge districts. These cases we're winning, they're all over the country, they're not judge shopped. It was a single judge district, and he was purporting to issue these orders that could have endangered healthcare for everyone and our entire drug regulatory system, which could have endangered all of our medication. And like there was literally no concern. And in fact, people that raised concerns were called radical. Some of the Senate Republicans would say these are radical ideas around the judiciary. That the radical thing is going out and threatening judges like this president's doing. So I think there's a lot of hypocrisy. I love it that you always remember that because, of course, it really bothers us at Democracy Forward, given how much work we do on those issues.
and because you're from Texas.
Well, I mean, Texas is, yeah, we're going to talk about Texas.
Okay, speaking of which, and I promise we're going to get back to your bailiwick, but I gotta, since you're from Texas
Let's do it.
and you're also involved in the democracy parts of what's going on in Texas. So we got we have the effort by Republicans to re-gerrymander a map that is already being gerrymandered, a map that my law firm and others are already challenging as illegal and unconstitutional, to try to squeeze 5 more seats out of it. I know that's not Democracy Forward's lane per se, but the legislature in Texas, unlike a lot of states, but by intentionally in Texas, there is a quorum requirement, and so there have to be 100 members of the state house present on the floor in order for legislation to pass. A large number of the Democrats have left the state of Texas. They are in Illinois or elsewhere, and therefore Greg Abbott and the Republicans don't have quorum to pass this grotesque, obscene gerrymandered bill. But what you're seeing now is essentially, let's see, Governor Abbott filed a lawsuit to essentially strip these Democrats of their seats. You've got Ken Paxton, who is filing his own lawsuit and doing other crazy things. Then you have John Cornyn, who has said, notwithstanding the fact that he's a U.S. senator, so how he plays into this is unclear. He has asked Kash Patel to send the FBI in to locate these people, which is a little weird because it's not like we don't know where they are. They were giving press conferences
Right.
in Illinois,
Right.
but presumably to maybe throw them in the back of vans and disappear them back to the state of Texas. So, both as a democracy advocate and as a Texan, what the hell do you make of this?
Well, I mean, this is look. I've been saying it. You've never disputed it. If people would have been paying attention to Texas decades ago. I mean, Texas is where this autocracy really. I mean, this is not the first time that that political forces have tried to off-cycle gerrymander, as you well know. I mean, in the early 2000s, they did that. They deprived a range of communities of fair representation, including, by the way, the community I grew up in, where many communities, predominantly African American communities, predominant Latino communities, they were completely shattered in the map, where they have no common representation now. And then this has been going on, and now we're decades later, and you actually have the governor of Texas and Ken Paxton both independently suggesting that they can deprive people in Texas of the representative that they elected, because that representative is using a tool that the Constitution of Texas says representatives have. And you're correct. It's a unique feature of Texas law. There's only about 3 or 4 other states that have that type of a 2/3 quorum requirement since the 1800s. People have left the state or refused to come to the chamber in order to advocate for their communities, which is what these representatives are doing. And we have never seen a governor or any type of state leadership take the position that people would be deprived, that voters in Texas would not have the representative that is representing them because they are doing such a good job. They're using all the tools they have to represent them, which in this case is leaving the state because of this terrible special session. So, as a Texan, I'm very concerned about it. As a lawyer, it is really unbelievable. We've been doing some research, and I think by the time this airs, Democracy Forward will have some things on file. But never in the history have you seen an actual elected official, a governor, seek to say that they can displace the will of the voters by depriving someone of a seat for using something that's enabled by the Constitution. So we're really concerned about it. I know you know all about the maps and are very concerned about that, but this is very concerning. We call the fight between Paxton and Cornyn and Abbott, we call that a circular firing squad in Texas. And so the one thing that might save us a little bit momentarily is that they're all fighting before each other in institutions that they all control. They're all filing things in the Supreme Court that all contradict each other. So we'll see.
Right. But don't you think that what we are seeing, the escalation of the tactics, the weaponization of government, which, is, look, I'm the first one to say that Donald Trump is weaponizing the federal government. He's weaponizing against his opponents. He's willing to weaponize it against groups like Democracy Forward and others. But don't you think that part of what's happening in Texas here is the fact that the Texas governor and the Texas legislature and the Texas attorney general, they have been running roughshod over people's constitutional rights in that state, in other areas, not having to do with redistricting or
Everywhere.
legislators. Yeah, and that this is just kind of like bred a contempt for the democratic process in Texas. I mean, isn't this kind of like, that they were able to get away with it in one thing, so now they're bringing it to another?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think the other piece of it is for people that are living in Texas who continue to be so harmed by this. I mean, they called this special session and immediately started introducing these maps when there are people in Texas and communities that were ravaged by the floods. The state hasn't expanded Medicaid. You have women that are literally dying. It is not safe to have a child in Texas right now. Many women leave the state if they have resources to do so later in their pregnancies. I mean, it's out of control. And what that's done to the people is, of course, how are you supposed to expect people that are living there to have faith in this thing that we call democracy when there has been this really bad faith effort to overhaul it and to create a more autocratic regime? And I always say that sort of where Texas goes, you got to watch it, because that's often where the national right-wing movement and the national Republican movement will go. And so when I look at Texas, and when I'm glad people are paying attention to it, and you've been talking a lot about this, this is a real canary in a coal mine. And it's why we need to be doing everything we can. And certainly, all of us are going to do that to push back. And I'm really proud of the lawmakers. This is not easy for them to do this, but they are representing their communities. They are using the tools the Texas Constitution provides to represent their communities and to say, you're not going to take away the representation of people in the state on their watch. So that's really inspiring. I hope that can inspire the Texas tenacity, can inspire others to use all the tools they have.
Yeah. And, if you want to know about voter suppression or the efforts to deprive voting rights, a good place to start is Texas, because Skye is exactly right. I mean, what oftentimes begins in Texas is then becomes kind of a model and something that gets carried on elsewhere. And we're seeing that, by the way, also in the redistricting arena, where now you have governors, Governor DeSantis in Florida, the governor of Missouri, and elsewhere now saying that they want to do what Texas has done. So we shouldn't dismiss just what's happening in Texas as just a Texas problem. But I want to return to the federal government and the weaponization. And so one of the things that I hear a lot of from guests from people who interview me, from people who I meet on the street, is a fear, and a fear that is sort of pervading that. If you stand up to the Trump administration, if you do something they don't like, the next thing you know, they will be focused and targeted on you. And so it strikes me that this could impact you in three ways, right? One is just as an individual, right? As Skye Perryman, you've become a very vocal and an outspoken and an identifiable critic of this administration. And with that, I'm sure I know for myself that with that comes some good, but also comes some unwanted attention. The second is to Democracy Forward, the organization you run, which is actually a very large organization. You're responsible for. It's not just you and three other people sitting around a card table. This is a large organization that has to worry about what it means to be in the sights of the Trump administration. And then finally, something I haven't really asked anyone else is your clients. Whether your clients are saying, what, I'd love to sue, but I don't want to be the plaintiff. I don't want to be a named plaintiff. I don't want to bring more on. I don't want to bring more attention to me and the plight that's happening. So talk a little bit about what the weaponization has meant, and how you deal with it individually as a leader, as a lawyer who has to assure clients. Like, talk a little bit about that.
Well, I'll start with the clients. I mean, those are the people that we serve, and there is a lot of fear. And we have a number of communities that really have to think about, or if they do something and it makes the administration upset, does that mean that they're not going to be able to feed the unhoused people in their communities that they're doing, right? They're doing real work that is helping the lives of people every single day, and they're weighing that. And as much as that fear is there, what we have tried to do is because we believe this, and we would not tell someone or suggest to someone that it was a good idea to go into court if we didn't think it was. Now, we can't advise, these are personal decisions that these clients and organizations have to make, but we believe the courts are a real tool of protection here, and we've seen that in the early days of the administration. The National Council of Nonprofits, a small LGBTQ nonprofit stage, a bunch of them got together. We had to go into court, as you know, within a few hours to stop the national funding freeze, and there was a lot of concern. Elon Musk was roving around. Trump was, tweeting about the cases, and they went in and stopped it. And bullies pay attention when you show that you're not going to be bullied. And so, for a lot of our clients, not for all of them, it depends on the context that they're in, a lot of them seeing those examples have really helped get the courage. We truly believe that the cost of inaction is much greater than the cost of action. We have not seen the harm to people that are standing up as much as we have seen it to institutions that have tried to keep their head down and were a bit wishy-washy, and the administration kind of smells blood in the water and knows they can come forward. For our organization, this is a big concern for everyone. We're humans. It would be inauthentic to say that it's not. You probably saw, because you follow the same stuff that I do, this week the Department of Justice brought sanctions against an immigration attorney in Los Angeles. We think about these things all the time, but our the way we
There's
have
an
tried.
entire presidential memorandum saying that the Department of Justice should seek sanctions at lawyers. It starts by talking about me.
Well,
So I'm
there you
very
go.
aware of this.
Exactly. I mean, well, so and where what we have tried to do, and we try, our organization, we get to serve our clients. We try to be a values based organization. Is our number one value is that this is the work that we have the privilege of doing every day is work that, along with a lot of other things that people need to do in this moment, is one of the only chances this country has to come out of where we are. And so our North Star is that we are going to take whatever step we have to take to ensure that our work continues. And so that doesn't mean we don't back away from doing the work. We do it every day, but we try to be quite smart about it, doing it in community. We've really appreciated your support. We've appreciated the support of so many organizations because this is a hard time. And so I think that that's how we've been doing it. And I always say to our team, courage is a practice. You have to fake it till you make it. There's a lot of things that I had to go before I went before this like hostile house committee. I mean, voluntarily because lots of other leaders wouldn't do it. And you just
Yeah.
go in there and do it. You just go in there and do it. And then guess what? You learn how to be courageous. It's a practice that we have to
And
practice every day.
and everybody should focus on that. Like, I know this from talking to Skye about it in real time. You know, people will sometimes say, Marc, you went on TV for 60 Minutes when other lawyers went. She went into the House Republicans, okay, because Democrats could not find someone else who was willing to sit there and stare them down and suffer not just their abuse, but the abuse of their followers. And Skye Perryman is the real deal. When you want to talk about someone who knows how to stand up in the face of fear and be courageous, it is the woman you are looking at, because it is not just that. And I wanted to ask you about this. I know we've got to go, but I got to ask you about this. Before Donald Trump and the threats and all of that now, which is probably the greatest intimidation that lawyers or others can face. Um, the most violent anti-lawyer, anti-cause group there was the anti-choice
Yes.
crazies. The people who would target the reproductive rights, and you were doing that work. And
Yeah.
so, you have come from a place of tremendous courage, because there were people who got killed by the pro-life crazies. You saw doctors and clinics being blown up and lawyers being threatened. And so talk a little bit about how, not just in the last 6 months, but in the span of your career, you have managed to manage that fear, manage that reality that you have taken on causes that are righteous, but which bring with them a lot of personal hate.
And I mean, maybe it was being someone that believes the way I do, living in the middle of conservative Texas. That was a decent warm up, probably, because those anti sort of very religious right forces and the far right forces were, really alive and well there far before we've seen them in so many other communities. But I'll say that for me, when we reflect on the way this country has progressed and who we are, it has always been scary, and justice has never come without a price. And so, to me, I often get bashful when people start talking about courage and me in the same sentence, because I'm thinking about the people that were part of the abolitionist movement. I'm thinking about people that were part of the civil rights movement. I'm thinking about the people in World War II that were in Europe and that resisted fascism, when it would have been easier to go along with it for Aryans that were in Germany at the time. And so I always try to think about those examples of courage. We all have our personal stories about people that have exhibited courage in our own personal lives or in through heroes. I often tell a story of Barbara Jordan. We've been thinking about voting rights 60 years. She was part of that Texas delegation, but Barbara Jordan was the youngest. She was female. She was Black. And she was the one that had the courage to speak truth to power in the Nixon impeachment proceedings in the early 1970s. And so those examples of people who, it's often the ones that you don't expect, that don't, and you see this with the law firms, right? We're seeing small firms and we're seeing
Mhm.
individual lawyers. I was just on the phone to somebody today who was a lawyer in Texas that wants to help with something. We're seeing these people step up in a time when big institutions that have privilege and power are cowering. And so I think that that's how I try to look at it. If I ever feel that I'm a little scared, I try to get a dose of perspective by thinking about our past. It doesn't make it any less scary, but it certainly makes you in community with the people here today. You're one of those, and so many of the organizations we work with who are exhibiting that courage, and the people that came before us in our families and in our communities and in history.
Well, you are too bashful. You're too modest. You are one of the heroes of this era. When the history of this era is written, you will be listed as someone who was willing to stand up and fight for the people who had no voice. You were willing to take cases that others said shouldn't be brought because it wasn't convenient. You represented clients that others said should be ignored, literally ignored, in a hellhole, in a gulag in El Salvador, because it wasn't the individual that they thought was the perfect person to defend. And you have, as a result, you have not only done the righteous thing by your clients, you have done the courageous thing and the impactful thing for all Americans in this democracy. So, Skye Perryman, you are a hero of mine, and I want to thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Defending Democracy. Please make sure you're subscribed to Democracy Docket's newsletters to stay informed on the latest voting rights and democracy news.